Hey, welcome back to another episode of Parker's Pensées. I'm your host, Parker Case, and this is a podcast where we explore all the deepest ideas in philosophy, theology, nature, and life. I love thinking about cool stuff, so come think with me. Today's episode is awesome. I'm really stoked for it. Sometimes you guys give me crap about my little intro, like philosophy, theology, nature, and life. Where's the nature and life? Well, today we're talking about it. We're going to be talking about, surprise, surprise, the simulation hypothesis, and we're going to cover everything: nature, life, mind, God, all of it. I'm really stoked for it. I have with me a special guest, Michael Jones of Inspiring Philosophy. And man, when he first started getting into some of this stuff on his channel, I was like freaked out. I was like, man, idealism and all this stuff. I don't know. Poor Michael, what's happening to him? And then I started studying philosophy of mind and trying to come up with a definition of physics and seeing all that good stuff and be like, oh, no, this seems right. This is good. So a lot of you have been telling me I got to get him on the channel, and you guys were right. I'm super stoked for it. Before we jump in, though, I want to thank everyone who's making this podcast possible on Patreon. Parker's Pensées. How many more P's can we get? You guys are awesome. If you guys like the podcast, please support it. You can become a YouTube member if you're watching on YouTube. If you're watching anywhere else, check out my Patreon. There's all sorts of perks that you get over there, either place. So feel free to do that. Please do so I can feed my dog and keep the lights on. All right, without further ado, let's bring in Michael Jones of Inspiring Philosophy, and let's talk God, idealism, everything. Here we go. Michael, thanks so much for coming on the podcast, man.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, definitely. I started listening to your stuff years and years and years ago, and I was listening to like a couple different videos you had, and I didn't even know they were by you. Like Man or Rabbit, I saw that one like way back. That was awesome. Started getting into C.S. Lewis, but then just some like general kind of philosophy type stuff, and then I watched another one and saw you were a Christian. And it like blew my mind. I was like, bro, we got we got one on YouTube here. One of these guys is a Christian. So um been following you for a long time, and the idealism stuff freaked me out, but now dude, you're convincing me. I'm real close. So I want to jump in on that, but before we get into like computational type stuff, um just a curiosity question: where did the name Inspiring Philosophy come from?
Everyone asks me that. I'm always like, not really a good story. I was trying YouTube handles and I wanted like a more official name, so I tried a couple different ones, something around philosophy, and finally I got Inspiring Philosophy. I'm like, oh, good, no one's taken this one yet, so I went with it. So that's how I got it.
Nice. That's awesome. Um, well, here's another one for you. This has become more and more important to me to get definitions from people. What do you think philosophy is? Like when you think about philosophy, what do you take that to be?
So I take it to be the basis of all knowledge. Before we can start doing other subjects, we have to do philosophy. So
Hmm.
if we're going to start doing mathematics, we have to understand what is mathematics? Why is mathematics important? Same with science, same with history. So it's really the first step I think humans take in acquiring knowledge. And we
Hmm.
begin with studying wisdom. What is the point of all this? Where do we go from here? So that's why I like philosophy so much because I think it's the gateway into so many other subjects.
Yeah. No, I'm totally with you. I've always or I've been telling people like it's kind of like a back door on a lot of stuff. If you study some good philosophy, it will help you understand a lot of other things more quickly. And you can see
Absolutely.
a lot of the same debates carry over into different fields. And that's why when you get a PhD in a subject, you get you're a doctor of philosophy of mathematics, of biophysics and biochemistry, all that stuff. So that's good.
Mhm.
I mean, do you like the definition, the love of wisdom, or is there, does that not capture what we're doing?
I guess it's fine. I don't know.
Yeah. I'm in this like long debate with some of my Christian philosopher friends who in Christian philosophy it's like super impious if you don't say it's a love of wisdom. They're like, no, of course it is. And I talk to all my secular friends, they're like, what? No, that doesn't capture what we're doing at all. So it's just random debate. Yeah, silly. Um,
Mhm.
well, dude, here's the easy one for you. Do we live in a computer simulation?
No, we don't live in a computer simulation. We're not in a computer, in my view.
Okay.
It's possible. I just don't think that's what we were actually in.
Yeah. I mean, so you get into like quantum physics and stuff, and the collapse of the wave function upon, like, being observed, like, that does a lot of work in your theory, right?
Yeah, so I am an idealist. I do think we
Yeah,
live in something that would be like a simulation, but I don't
yeah,
think we actually live in a computer. Like we're not software on a hard drive.
yeah,
But idealism is just basically the idea that all is mind,
mhm,
in opposed to physicalism, which says all is physical substances or all is particles, all is something physical. I say all is mind. So we do live in something that would be like an information reality. That's what the physical would be. It'd be information contingent upon mind.
yeah. Yeah, yeah, I wanted to ask you about that too. So, like, what do you think is most, fundamental? Do you think information is most fundamental, or, like, mathematics, or is math just another form of, information? What do you think about that?
Well, I mean, I don't think it'd be most fundamental to reality because information itself it would have to be contingent upon something else. Information, I don't think, can exist in and of by itself. Something
Yeah.
has to process information.
Mhm.
So I would say, what is the basis of reality? Would be mind or consciousness. Mind itself is fundamental. It cannot be reduced to anything other. It just simply is. It can be explained in its own terms, in terms of what it is, without appealing to something else that built up mind or consciousness.
Yeah.
It just simply is. And so that's on my view, on an idealist view, is that consciousness is fundamental. Matter reduces to information, which is being processed through minds
Mm.
or a mind, I guess.
Yeah, okay, that's helpful. That's a helpful distinction. There's this really good Cambridge Elements book, God and Abstract Objects, and I don't know how to say his name. I think it's Bone or Bon. He makes this argument about information being most fundamental because it is, like, substrate independent. It can be carried on, like, any kind of substrate, like a tennis ball has information, like, about its roundness and its color and all this stuff, but you can translate that into something else, but yet you don't have anything without information. And so he would say, like, yeah, information is most fundamental. But I like your point about, like, the mind's more fundamental, but what is, mind then?
Well, I mean, when people ask that, they typically want it explained in terms of something else. And my
Mhm.
response is mind is simply fundamental. You can't explain it by appealing to something beyond itself. So
Yeah.
take Democritus' view of the atoms, the ancient Greek philosopher. He would
Mhm.
not, if you were to ask him, well, what are the atoms? He'd be like, well, they just are. They build everything else. They can't
Yeah.
reduce to anything beyond themselves. And that's my view about mind. It just simply is fundamental. It cannot go beyond something else to explain it.
Do you think that it's like a substance though? Like, would you say that mind is a immaterial substance?
Yeah, I would say it's the fundamental substance, so to speak, of all of reality. So, since I'm a theist, I would say that the basis of reality is God. He is a mind, and He is what created everything else. And
Yeah.
everything that He created, like our world, is like an information world that is sort of like contingent upon His mind, so to speak.
Yeah.
And so then, we operate in that reality.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so fascinating. So, whew. Okay, when you talk about, like, you got a great playlist on this about emergent God, emergent world. The world that we live in, the physical reality that we perceive is, physical things are emergent out of information. Is that the right way to say it?
Yeah, so the idea is that if we start to study what the physical is from a philosophical and scientific perspective, they both converge to the same point, which is that we're not reducing to a substance.
Mhm.
So if you were to take an apple, for example, you could reduce it to its properties. You can explain it in terms of its color, its shape, its roundness, how it feels. But all of these are not properties of some sort of physical substance that's
Mm.
we would call the apple. They are just mental properties. It's qualia. Qualia is something you experience in your mental reality, like the color of something. Okay,
Yeah.
the color does not need to be. Color is what happens on a physicalist point is when different wavelengths hit the eye, create a chemical reaction, and they create an electrical signal in the brain, and you experience color. But color does not exist as part of that physical thing you're viewing. Okay, well then if all of what well that applies to basically every other thing you're experiencing with regards to the apple. The way it feels, the way it tastes, the way it might smell. All of these are mental sensations that allegedly are created by the brain. So the idealist says, well, wait a minute, if everything we're experiencing is mental in terms of like a physical apple, well, then why are we positing a physical reality beyond the mental world we experience?
Hmm.
Everything with regards to the apple can be reduced to information about it. And this is called bundle theory that
Right.
goes back to David Hume, which is that physical objects, according to the modern idealist, is that they're just a bundle of different properties.
Right.
We don't need to posit a substance, a physical object beyond the mental experience that we would call the essence of the apple. So really, well, the idealist says it's just that's what physical reality is. It's just this mental information. Scientifically, this seems to be pointing in this direction because when we study the base of all of our physical reality, we don't find a substance. People
Yeah.
used to think it was fundamental particles. Well, no, I mean, we now know that particles are like these different blips in quantum fields and in quantum field theory. They don't have to be physical substances. So people said, well, maybe quantum fields are the basis of reality. But then David John Baker in 2008 wrote his paper against field interpretations of quantum field theory and pointed out all the same problems we have with a particle interpretation
Yeah.
apply to a field interpretation. Fields are just information as well. So everything we experience in reality just reduces to information, according to the latest science. Same within philosophy. We study objects according to their properties. It just reduces to these mental experiences we're having. So
Hmm.
the idealist is just saying, cut out all the extra baggage of some sort of separate physical reality beyond our mental experiences and just say what it is. We experience a mental world. Everything is mind.
Hmm.
Everything is mind or is information that is processed in mind. And that information is what we call physical reality. So that's where the idealist gets his arguments from. And I have many different ways I can argue for this.
Yeah, dude, I really like it. So one thing, I'm trying to anticipate stuff from the listeners. Someone might say, "Well, look, bundle theory. This is from like the first person perspective. That like this lamp I'm looking at, it's just a bundle of properties, all that good stuff." Yeah. Someone like the naive realist or someone or indirect realist, whoever would say like there's still something there producing those properties. So maybe I can't like get to the thing in and of itself, maybe, and the contents are all clapping and stuff, but there still seems to be something outside of me that's producing that, even if we're in like, you know, a simulated world or God's mind or something. So like this, I don't know, it might be like it, someone might say there's like an illicit shift from like the first person to like a third person, like, oh,
Hmm.
because it appears to me like, you know, bundle theory or whatever, as a bunch of properties, therefore, everything just actually is, and I'm living in someone else's mind. Do you get that objection? You see where I'm trying to grasp at here?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to disagree. I do think there is something creating those properties, and this is
Yeah,
why I tend to compare idealism to worlds that are in video games.
sure.
So, if you're playing a video game and your avatar walks into a room and you see a cup on a table, and then you leave the room, is the cup still there on the table? Well, no, it's not a real table. All that it would be there is just ones and zeros, the computer code.
Yeah.
But when you turn and look back at the cup, it's going to appear as a physical cup.
Mhm.
Likewise, that would be how my view of idealism works, is that, yeah, there is this underlying information. So if I go around the corner in my room and I see a cup on the table, the cup is always going to be there in an information sense, even if though the physical manifestation of it doesn't show up until I look at it.
Yeah.
So with that idea, it's there is this sort of information reality that we don't control, we don't
Okay.
create, we cannot bend it to our will. We
Yeah.
just participate in it.
Yeah.
We cause the physical appearance of something when we interact with it.
So I caught that in one of your videos when you're arguing against solipsism. I thought that was a really fascinating argument to go from solipsism. Another thinker that you were quoting, you said, you know, it collapses to realism, and you're like, no, I don't think so. I think it collapses all the way back to idealism. I thought that was a sweet move. Um,
Mm.
uh, I've heard on the simulation hypothesis, and I want to distinguish. I want to say like, I don't know, naturalistic simulation hypothesis, where people are positing like a humanoid simulator, one level of reality below ours, not theistic
Mhm.
idealism. They'll argue about the collapse of the wave function. They'll say, look, that's just because when you're looking at the electron, it renders, and yeah, of course now it looks like a particle because it actually is saving RAM or something, uh, by only rendering what's being perceived. And so, boom, you know, it's kind of like idealism, but that explains, you know, quantum mechanics. are you making a similar move here, or how would you interact with someone who's trying to argue that like, no, we don't live in God's mind. We live in, a actual simulated world, and the collapse of the wave function actually evidence for saving RAM or something like that.
Yeah, I don't think that would actually get us there.
Hmm.
There's really no. I know there have been some tests to see if we live in a simulation. They didn't come out as the researchers had suspect. They came out as the researchers had suspected. They don't.
Yeah.
Those specific tests don't point to us living in a actual computer simulation. Uh, but I mean, like saving RAM, I don't really think that would necessarily follow. And
Yeah.
the way I sort of argue against that is more philosophical. If
Hmm.
our world is living in a is a simulation on a computer, then is that world have fundamental particles which create it, which is different from our worlds?
Right.
Okay, well then it's got to be simulated by another computer, and then so on and so on. So instead of it being all turtles all the way down, is it
Yeah.
computers all the way down?
Yeah.
So you have to posit this really complicated world that is sort of creating our computer simulation. It's not the same physics as ours. You have to posit a whole new realm of physics, which is undetectable.
Hmm.
That's getting ad hoc. It's
Yeah.
multiplying entities beyond necessity.
Right.
It's far more simpler, more parsimonious of an explanation to say that we are just being stimulated by one mind versus all this convoluted physics to explain this other reality that built the computer.
Yeah.
So it just becomes a simpler explanation in my view.
Yeah. No, I love that, and yeah, I used to think simulation hypothesis was like this huge rival coming up against Christianity and theism, and now more and more I'm seeing like, well, dude, you're kind of just stepping over into our field, and now we don't need to multiply entities. Let's shave off some stuff, and you still need a necessary being, and I still have lots of arguments for that kind of God. So it's really fascinating, and I'm really actually excited now that it's been taken off in culture. And it's cool that you've been working on this stuff already, and you just have it all here ready for us. So when it comes to like the emergence of the physical, there's a couple different ways that I think we could probably think about it. Like God is a spiritual being, and He's thinking up our world, and it kind of like grows out of Him. So there would still like the physical world would still be I'm trying not to be like rude, or impious talking about God, but the external world would still be external to God, even though fundamentally dependent on Him. And
Hmm.
I don't know if that would still count as idealism or not. And then there's another one where we're like literally God's thoughts, like inside of God, inside of His mind, whatever that would mean to be inside of a spiritual being's mind, right? So out of those two conceptions, maybe you have another one that you like better, but what do you make of that? Which one do you think we actually is the case? Yeah,
Well, these are two different views. Panentheism.
yeah,
So, pantheism is the idea all is God.
yeah,
Panentheism is the idea all is in God. Traditionally, Christians, especially of the Greek Orthodox approach, have held to a panentheistic approach. This goes back to thinkers like Maximus the Confessor or Gregory Palamas. But it's more of a weak panentheism.
yeah,
A stronger panentheism would be like that we are part of God's knowledge of, that makes him complete. We're part of his essence.
mm,
Like he could not, if we disappeared, he would lack knowledge. Weak panentheism doesn't say that. We're not part of God's essence. We're part of his energies.
mhm,
So we are, no, we're emulating from his energies, is what I would say.
yeah,
So the way you got to think of it is like, I give it an analogy. So think of the world of Middle Earth and J.R.R. Tolkien. We wouldn't say the world of Middle Earth is essential to what makes J.R.R. Tolkien. We could picture a possible world where J.R.R. Tolkien exists with his same personality and everything, and he doesn't write anything about Middle Earth. It just doesn't exist. So J.R.R. Tolkien could exist without that world and still be J.R.R. Tolkien. Likewise, you could say the same thing about God. It's that he creates this mental reality that emulates from his energies, and that's where we are. He creates these different, uh, from his perspective, these different like storytelling worlds, I guess you
yeah,
could say.
mhm,
That's where we are. And so it's sort of like that. It's a mental reality created by God, but is not entirely part of his knowledge. So that's the difference between weak and strong panentheism. And
yeah.
weak panentheism is what the Greek Orthodox Church would advocate for, not strong panentheism.
Yeah. Yeah, and again, dude, I told you I've been watching a lot of your stuff today. Yeah, you called that Palamite, from Palamas, I think.
Yeah.
Panantheism, and I thought that was helpful. Um, yeah. Okay. So I wrote my master's thesis, one of them on the authorial analogy for the God world relation. So it's super close to like we live in God's dream, or we live in God's mind. But I still wanted to hold on to like the external world type thing. So we live in like a theodrama. We live in like the novel. But then something that made me super uncomfortable was like, well, that novel is dreamed up in the author's head first. So like, where
Hmm.
does like Middle Earth existed in Tolkien's mind? And I use Tolkien too. Um, and so like it was there before he ever put pen to paper, or before however he did it, right? Like typed it up on a typewriter or something. And so more and more as I'm talking with like theistic idealists, I'm like, dang, I think that like it's already been here. And so you guys keep like sucking me in closer and closer. Um, I think this will probably hinge on what you think thoughts are and whether they're like constitutive of your being or not. Because like
Hmm.
if you are your thoughts, and we go in for idealism and we are God's thoughts, then like we are constitutive of God. Um, uh, I mean, have you thought through that? Have you considered like, does that force you to say you're not your thoughts, or what do you make of that?
Well, I mean, it's hard to say.
Sure,
Sometimes we feel like we have thoughts that are not our own. We feel intrusive, that we call them intrusive thoughts.
sure,
This is a very complicated question in philosophy of mind. What are thoughts?
yeah,
But let's take some cues from some authors here. Let's go back to J.R. Tolkien, for example. When he was writing Lord of the Rings, he felt sometimes that the characters were taking on a life of their own.
yeah,
They were doing things he didn't expect they were going to do.
yeah,
So at one point, he says that he was writing and he wrote that Galadriel said, "I passed the test," and he had to sit back and go, I wonder what she means by that. I'm not entirely sure. I'll have to think about that.
yeah,
And so it's kind of a weird thing for him to say, but like how could he not be in control of the story at this point? Let's go even a little deeper now. How many times have you had dreams where you have people in your dreams you talk to, and you don't feel like you're controlling their actions? They're
right,
just in your mind doing things, but they're still part of your mind, aren't they not? You're kind of having a conversation with yourself in some way in these dreams, but
yeah,
not really. I mean, minds are complicated things if we think about it. It's a
yeah,
lot to really digest and go through. But every night we often create characters in our head that we don't fully control and seem to act of their own,
hmm,
but they're still in consciousness. They're still part of our conscious mind in some sense, but they're not totally under our control.
yeah,
And authors will say this about that when they really start writing characters that they love, they take on a life of their own. George R. R. Martin has said the same thing about Arya Stark, that she has just does things that she's going to do,
yeah,
and he has hard times writing because he doesn't know how Arya is going to get to where he wants her to be. He doesn't want to force her there. He wants her to get there of her own will, her own character development. So when we're talking about this, I mean, it really does seem that in a lot of ways, we humans can create characters that take a life of their own. How
mhm,
much more easy would it be for a god who's far more infinitely powerful than we are to create worlds like this where characters take on lives of their own in these mental storytelling worlds?
yeah. I really like that, man. I've been thinking about that one a lot too, about authors and their characters taking on a life of their own. And I think like if God, oof, I don't know, I want to be careful, but there's something that it's like to be Parker, and I don't mean from like a qualia perspective. I just mean like there's a concept of me that God had. I mean, we hear about this in the Bible where God, had you in mind beforehand, stuff like that. But like if God had like Michael Jones in mind, but it had none of your characteristics, it's like, well, then that's just a name referring to a different thing. Because like there's a concept of you that like you can't change so much that it wouldn't be you anymore. And so like if God wants to create this character Michael Jones, he's gonna have to be like you. Otherwise he'd create a different character. You know what I mean? So
Hmm.
like Michael Jones is gonna do certain things if he's gonna be that character that God wants him to be. And so I think that's such a fascinating thing to think through. Like I'm not trying to like mess with God's omnipotence or anything like that, but I'm talking about like, conceptual truths type stuff. And I don't know. It's super fascinating. Even think of like origins, essentialism type stuff. If you go in for that, then like,
Mhm.
well, Michael's got to have these certain parents, otherwise he's just not going to be Michael Jones. And I wonder if there's something there that Molinists can use um, in helping, make sense of the grounding objection. And so
Mhm.
I haven't touched it a ton, but I'm like, I think I'm not a Molinist myself, but I'm thinking like they might be able to. I mean, I think you're a Molinist, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and so I think there's something there in like the concept of the person, maybe, and I don't know. So like the grounding objection is like, well, what are all these choices grounded in? And it's like, well, it's grounded in the story and the type of character that God wants this person to be, and so they can't be something else, or the story doesn't work. You can all, I mean, I go in for like a compatibilist view and reasons responsiveness, but I like broadening it out. I want as many people to use this like authorial analogy or yeah, in the mind of God, idealism type stuff. Like, yeah, I just want to toy with it more and more and see, how much fruit we can get with it.
Hmm.
Yeah. Well, one thing that's okay, one thing that I'm having a hard time with thinking through idealism is notions of evil. So I'm wondering if an idealist would be committed to like a privationist view of evil. Otherwise, it seems like all the evil that's ever existed that we ever know about that we can conceive of in this possible world, all that evil actually exists like in God. And maybe you've already broached this with the dream type stuff, but have you thought through like on idealism? It seems like evil just like is in God, and if He's a perfect being, it sounds like it might be inappropriate to say that. What do you make of that?
Yeah, I take a privation view. I mean, I remember C.S. Lewis saying that all evil is an attempt to obtain either power, pleasure, or safety.
Yeah.
And it's just the act of trying to get those things on the wrong way. Well, power, pleasure, and safety are all good things. They're not inherently evil. So I do not think, the whole issue around the guise of the good, I don't think it's possible to do something without good intentions, or if you're seeking something good.
Hmm.
Evil is just the corrupt way of obtaining those things. So it's impossible to do evil just for the sake of evil, in my view. You're
Hmm.
always going to do evil for the sake of something good, ultimately. It's just a corrupted form of it. So that's my view on it.
Yeah. What about like Satan tempting Adam and Eve? What do you think? Can you come up with like a good that he would be aiming at in a corrupt way?
Yeah, so I mean, he is trying to obtain power, obviously. If he can get these creatures to eventually worship him, which we see in the progression of the fall, then he obtains more power. He gets more aspects of God's image now worshiping him, and it gives him power. It would give him
Hmm.
pleasure as well. It may even give him safety in some regard, because if he may, I'm speculating, of course, but
Yeah.
from his
Right.
perspective, he may be thinking like, they're almost like a shield. God can't destroy me without his image being destroyed with me. So can even argue from that perspective.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. That's good. Yeah. So I think this taking a privationist approach might be helpful for critiques of like omnisubjectivity. There's Ryan Mullins. I don't know if he named it or not, but he's been making it popular. There's this objection to omnisubjectivity that's like it's called the horny God objection, and it's like really hard to even say that, but it's like there's like we don't if God feels everything that humans feel, we don't want to say like God feels those kind of thoughts. Or Graham Oppy comes up with he calls it like body thoughts objection, that you have these like body thoughts, which is a super outdated term, but um he's an older dude, so we don't it feels like wrong to attribute these to God, or to have God feel these emotions. So this one might be different. So we're saying like evil isn't a substance that like exists in God because it's a privation, a corruption of something that is good. But what about those kind of like qualitative what about qualia, like evil qualia, like finding joy in torturing someone? That's like being experienced by God, or is it not? Does God not experience our subjective qualia?
Yeah, I don't think he necessarily does. If he does, he experiences it through us, so he would experience what, like me experiencing these
Ah,
evil
sure,
thoughts.
sure, sure.
So it'd be that kind of thing. I mean, my understanding of omniscience is God just knows all true propositions. I don't think it
Okay.
requires all experiences. I think that leads to some sort of logical absurdities on that view. So I guess I would just push back on the definition of omniscience.
Yeah, well, so that's good. I was thinking maybe pushing that on idealism because, these we don't have like we don't have separate existence. Like we don't exist outside of God. So then but but if you can still make that distinction on idealism, then it's like,
Yeah, I
okay,
don't think it's a I don't think it's a problem because I just go back to the analogy of like an author creating characters.
yeah,
He's not experiencing those emotions his characters are
yeah,
having. He's experiencing his characters experiencing those emotions.
yeah,
So it would be a chain. It would be he could only experience the characters experiencing those emotions in those situations that they're in.
yeah. Yeah, I really like that. Man, I really like that. What happens I'm just going like shotgun random stuff at you now. What
That's fine.
what does collapse the wave function in your view? Is it human consciousness or is it God? Like, cuz it looks like it collapses when we look at it. Not
Right.
necessarily when God does. So like why is human consciousness able to like collapse the wave function?
Well, I think it has to. I think it is human consciousness, or any conscious creature would collapse the wave function.
Okay.
So, and even animals, in my view, because I don't think God is like a giant eyeball that is observing the universe and therefore keeping everything collapsed. But that was similar to what George Berkeley would have said.
Right.
That I don't take that view. I don't think God
Okay.
has to. I think He creates the quote code of the universe, and He's aware of it. But when we conscious beings interact with that code, we create the manifestation of the physical object. And then he is just simply aware of what we're doing and what we're viewing. He doesn't have to be viewing the information reality we live in from a third person perspective.
Hmm.
So, yeah, I do think it is human consciousness that collapses the wave function.
Do you have any thoughts on like how that works? Like what's the is there a mechanism? Like why is it that consciousness does that? It's so weird.
Yeah, well, here's the thing: is that in quantum mechanics, we have a mathematical equation that explains the wave function. We can explain particles in terms of different equations. We don't have an equation that can explain collapse. So we have a
Hmm.
wave function, we have particles, something in the middle happens. This is called the measurement problem. How
Mhm.
do we go from the wave function to particles? So this is why some physicists, like Henry Stapp, for example, have argued that it is consciousness, that it is consciousness causing collapse. And so how it happens is, I would just say it's the same way with you play a video game. You go into a room, and then the code manifests a appearance of everything that would be in the room for you to play the game. Same kind of idea. It's
Yeah.
just when this information enters into consciousness, it has to appear as something, and so it takes on physical forms.
Yeah.
It has to sort of, if it's going to interact with a conscious agent, it has to appear in some form, and this is just how it appears.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so if let me repeat it back and see if I got it. So it's like God may not be actively like, "Oh shoot, over here. I need to collapse this. I need to collapse this." But more so like he set up the dream or he set up the dream world. I don't yeah, he set that up with certain psychophysical laws and certain certain laws that when an observer looks at this, it will collapse. Does that sound right?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Um so how you have this really great video on I don't know if it's called like the death of materialism or something like that, but it's talking about how materialism, physicalism gets things backwards, where mind doesn't come out of material, but material comes out of mind. Maybe that's the right way of saying it.
Mhm.
Do you think we have souls?
Well, define what we mean by soul, because the way I define soul would be more in an Aristotelian fashion. So I would say the soul is the combination of your personality, your thoughts, your dreams, your emotions, all of that bundled up. That's your soul, and that evolves over time because you
Yeah.
have new experiences, you form new memories. So yeah, I do think we have a soul, and I think that does go on after death. And so I would say that everyone is a mind that is building a soul.
Okay. Um, yeah, yeah. Okay, so I actually I like that. So I like the term like Thomistic dualism, where it's like you are a soul, and your body is a mode of your soul. So you have properties and an exemplification relation, but you're the substance that's a soul, and that your soul like does the informing of your body. Um, if you're okay, when you say Aristotelian, like, do you split up into like the intellect and stuff like that, or are you not going that fine grained with like what the soul is?
N- Not necessarily. It's
Okay.
like it's just in a real Aristotelian fashion versus a Platonic
Okay. Okay.
understanding of how they would define the soul. Yeah.
Okay. So, typically we think maybe like on the folk level, Christian folk level, like we live in this physical reality, and then when we die, our non-physical soul goes to heaven, which is like an immaterial place, and it's just chilling. And most of us don't even think about new heavens and new earth, and we just kind of stop there. Maybe we get angel wings. In a idealist view, when you die, is it still right to talk about your soul being separated from your body?
Yeah, and I think quantum mind theory actually kind of does help with that a little bit. So I hold to a quantum mind view that the brain is basically doing quantum computing.
Yeah.
That's how we think and make decisions, and it's very complicated stuff. It's part of my irreducible mind series. I have a whole
Okay.
video in that series on quantum mind alone. So the mind is basically quantum computing. Now, when we die, according to some quantum mind theories, is that that information in the brain is still entangled through quantum entanglement.
Mhm.
So it still stays as connected. It can disconnect from the brain and continue on. And so that's generally my view, is that when we die, the quantum information of the brain disconnects and can continue on. So if you're a Christian, for example, that means possibly, again, I'm speculating here.
Sure, sure.
I can't prove any of this, but
Yeah.
maybe in some sense we entangle with Christ in some way or with God. And maybe hell is just that entangled information slowly disintegrating out of existence because it has nothing to entangle with.
Mm,
So that kind of is my general idea. And so you continue on. Now, after death, I still think, my view of idealism is that if a conscious agent is in physical reality, it has to look like something,
yeah,
and that's what you are. You are what you physically are. That is just what a first-person conscious experience appears as. So what I see you, it's a third-person perspective of a first-person conscious experience.
yeah,
That's what it is. That's what we are. So when we die, if we go to another reality, another plane of existence, we have to manifest as something to appear, and then we'll just remanifest as a physical being, kind of like this, maybe in some sort of, maybe with different limitations, maybe with less limitations.
yeah,
I don't entirely know. I mean, because we don't know. And so that's generally it. And I compare it again to a dream world. When you dream, you manifest a physical appearance of yourself to interact in the dream. I've
right.
had dreams where I'm bleeding out. Why don't I ever dream that I'm naked? Why am I always in clothes? I'm able to manifest that self
That's a
in
good
my
point.
dreams. So likewise, I think after death, wherever we end up, we'll be able to it will just naturally be able to manifest a physical appearance of ourselves in some way or another. Maybe we'll be more ghostly, maybe not. I don't know. I've not been there.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good point. Um, yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, so sometimes people will talk about in a similar line of thought, like maybe with NDEs or something, near death experiences, they'll talk about heaven being more real, right? Um,
Yeah.
but on idealism, it's still you never escape the dream, and to do so, I actually think that's kind of a Christian doctrine of like, creator creature type stuff, where it's like, yeah, I don't know if we ever actually can escape the dream and like see God, in His fullness as God sees God or something like that. Like, so what do you make of that? Could God like bring us, dream beings into His level of reality?
I don't know,
Yeah, yeah.
obviously,
All this is
but I
speculation, right?
mean,
Yeah,
I don't think logically we could ever do that because I think it would require us being God to
that's right.
really,
That's what
to
I think too.
see.
Right.
His,
Yeah.
I think that's the thing, is if God is truly this infinite being as we talk of him, depending, he's not, and by infinite, I don't mean like an long list of numbers.
Yeah. Right.
But if he's truly an infinite being, maybe that's what eternity is. It's constantly trying to experience the greatness and the majesty of God. But because he is infinite, it just goes on infinitely, and
Yeah.
that's why we can continue to live on for eternity and not get bored.
Yeah.
because we're constantly going to be exploring this amazing creator who is the foundation of all reality.
Yeah. Yeah. Are you?
And in terms of the
Yeah.
dream aspect, I mean, yeah, but I mean, think of it just like Inception. I mean, maybe we're just like six dream layers down, and just heaven is just going up like additional
Totally, dude.
layers to where it feels
Dude,
more real every
I'm
time,
with you on that. I like that.
Yeah.
Are you familiar with Samuel Liebman's work at all? He's um, a Jewish philosopher, and he has stuff on like Hasidic idealism. Does that ring any bells? Dude, you gotta like.
No, it does not.
This is sweet. I'm actually excited. I get to like show you something. Um, but he has this paper. I think it's called like, are we God's imaginary friends or something like that? And it's actually this really
Mhm.
fascinating point of like, he's saying that we're imaginary beings, but we're God's imaginary beings, and that helps think through like God being original and God being like more real than us. And so yeah, whatever. Like we might have a hard time thinking we're imaginary beings because we know what our imaginary beings are like. But imagine a perfect being, a perfect mind's imaginary beings would be something like us. Like that's I think it's utterly like a theistic way of picturing God and his relation to the world. It's super fascinating. So all this, I keep
Yeah.
doing this to bolster it because like I said, man, I used to be so much like idealism, poor Matthew, he's leaving the faith. And now like, no, this is really fascinating stuff, man.
Yeah. I mean, I think again, if you talk to people who've, I mean, when we dream, we come up with imaginary people to talk to, but they take
Yeah.
on a life of their own.
Yeah.
Some people that have, feel like that, people that have like schizophrenia, for example, have that kind of condition too, where they make up people that they talk to and they take on a life of their own.
Right.
I mean, authors come up with people, and this is a more healthy version of that. I mean, they take up, they create characters that take on a life of their own.
Yeah.
This is one of the problems George R. R. Martin has right now finishing his book series, is he can't figure out how to get the characters he has created to the finale.
Yeah.
Why? Because he doesn't think based on their character development, how they're going to act, that they would go the direction he would like for them to go in. So he's got to think of different things he can put in their way that would influence them and make them go that way.
Yeah.
And that's what's really fascinating about writing these types of characters, is that in a lot of ways in our brains or in our minds, they take on a life of their own.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so good. Um, okay. I'm gonna go with this direction. So I got so many ways I want to go here, but um, is is God like pure information, or not? Like, do we not go that route?
No, I don't think he's pure information. I think he's a mind, and it's just the fundamental basis of reality. It cannot
Okay,
reduce to anything else.
okay. Are we? Um, sorry to keep like going over this. I just want to make sure it's clear. Like, are we? Would you say like we're made of mind? Is the stuff that we're made out of? Is it like thoughts and well, I guess is it thoughts or is it mind itself? Because that might be a helpful distinction, actually.
Yeah, I mean, I do think we are a substance that I call mind. I don't think we are just pure information, as some idealists
Okay,
might try to
that's
argue.
helpful. Yeah. Okay. So we are mind, um, and we are like God's mind, right?
Well, that's a difficult question. Some say that we are like somehow part of God's consciousness. I think how the Bible calls us the bride of Christ, that we are some sort of separate consciousness,
Okay.
and we are all just different. And in a sense, we are all aspects of that one consciousness, just creating different souls. So we have experienced separation from that.
Yeah. Okay. Um, okay. So we're made in God's image, and we're conscious, and probably not in the same way that He is, right? But probably like in an analogous sense, because we're made in His image. Do you think that
Mhm.
when you dream, is it possible that some of your dream characters are likewise conscious and less conscious or something like an analogous case to the way you are?
I mean, it's kind of hard to deny that, because
Hmm,
they're part of your mind, and your basis of your mind is your consciousness. So in
right.
some sense, they are in consciousness, and there are these different personalities operating in there. So like,
Yeah.
but they're not you. They're not part of your distinct soul. But
Yeah.
they kind of are. It's blurry. It's
Yeah.
there is this distinction, but there's not. It's hard to say. And so you could say that they are. It's hard to really deny that they are not. in some sense in consciousness.
Well, do you think that they have like so let me just say I have a dream Michael tonight. Gosh, this is getting weird. But like is it possible sorry man. Is it possible that dream Michael has a first person perspective?
Yeah, it's possible. I mean, I'm not going to say it's not
Yeah, yeah.
possible, but I mean, it's
Is it
hard to really say for sure
is it
because what are we
probable?
interacting with in dreams?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's hard for me to truly know because again, I
Yeah.
can't get outside of my first
Yeah.
person experience and
Right.
know if these other characters in my dream are actually having a first person experience. Because when I wake up, they disappear. They just fade back into the subconsciousness,
Right.
and it's like what's kind of going on there. It's hard to
Yeah.
really say. So
Yeah.
it's I want to say yes because in some sense they might be, but I can't fully say yes or no on that.
Yeah, I don't know why this is bugging me right now, man. This is the first time I've kind of thought about this. I talked with Josh Rasmussen a little bit about this, but we mostly focused on how we couldn't intentionally make our dream characters conscious, like if we wanted to, and how that's kind of a hard problem of another hard problem of consciousness is like making consciousness if like by choice. Um, but now I'm thinking like those dream characters, there's something like, oh man, we have to figure out like what do we do with fictional characters that we create? Like, does Bilbo Baggins exist, or whatever? Well, fine, whatever. But I could have a dream about Bilbo Baggins and interact with him tonight. And either that Bilbo Baggins, Parker's dream Bilbo Baggins, either has something that it's like to be him or not. And if he doesn't, then like he's a philosophical zombie, I guess. But like there's some fact of the matter. Either he has qualitative experience or not. And it's more likely that he does in my dream than he does when I like write a book about him or something because I am conscious. So maybe he could just be made out of my consciousness if I'm dreaming him.
Yeah, I mean, it could be a philosophical zombie still. I mean, it's just this, there's this information you've created sort of like this mini soul maybe of like this information that sort of just exists in your brain, or in your mind, but it doesn't really even take on a first person experience. It's
Yeah.
just, you could look at it almost like an AI or like a
Right.
computer program just gone wild.
Right. So, dude, that's fascinating because then, like, you could motivate Chalmers' argument against physicalism, from philosophical zombies, and be like, "This isn't a inconceivable phenomena. I have it every night. Either I have it every night, or I'm creating conscious beings every night. Which one to you seems more plausible?" And then you can run the argument, either way. That's really crazy to think about. I don't know. I'm just sorry. I'm
Yeah, well,
blowing our mind
the
here.
more you study your own mind and you study your own consciousness, it gets stranger and stranger, to be honest.
Yeah, yeah. Dude, I don't know, man. The physics is pretty wild too. I don't really mess with physics at all. So like when I really enjoy listening to your stuff and thinking about like the world and like man, like electrons and wave functions are maybe I'm not even getting this right, but they're just like probabilities, right? They're not you can like point out a probability of where it might be because I think of a wave as like it's a whole thing. It's like this. But it can you explain like what do people take waves to be in quantum wave theory?
Well, I mean, it's just the probability of where you
Yeah,
could find something
that's
that's in
so
that
weird.
wave there.
Yeah,
So, I mean, that's typically what we mean by that. Like Eliana Pessa, as a physicist, says a particle is nothing but effective field descriptions of a complicated dynamics coupling the environment and the fields. It's not really even a thing. It's just almost like a blip coming up in a different field. And
yeah,
so, and there's a probability of where you could find that blip.
yeah, yeah, and that's like that blows my mind because isn't that taken to be like the most fundamental physical thing? Even though like right, it's not probably not right to say that it's physical, but that's like you don't. Do they have anything lower than that? I guess are superstrings posited as being lower than a wave?
There are different theories that maybe there's strings. I mean, then
Yeah,
there's the competing big theory of loop quantum gravity as well. I mean, but I mean, what they'll say is that at the base of quantum field theory is quantum fields.
yeah,
But I mean, we know from that quantum fields have the same problems that particle interpretations have.
yeah,
So I mean, some physicists like Meinrad Kuhlmann are saying, well, we can't even we can't even posit something down there because he says a quantum field instead assigns abstract mathematical entities, which represent the type of measurement you could conduct.
Yeah.
So it is not at all clear what a particle or even a field is, as he says. And
No.
so they put out this idea called ontic structural realism, that at the base of all physical reality is just structures,
Mm,
information, but no actual substance.
yeah. Yeah, man. I remember that kind of I only know about structure type stuff because of studying like hylomorphism, and some of the hylomorphists go so deep on structures, and they're like, "Yeah, you're just structure," and it's like, what are we even talking about at this point? Like, it's so deep and so crazy. Like, well, what's a structure? And you get to a certain point, and something has to be fundamental. So you're like, it's fundamental. Like, I can't explain it anymore. You're like, all right, man, that's crazy, but all right, um, man, that's crazy. When it comes to again, dude, sorry for being sporadic here, but I'm just taking them as they're coming in here. When it comes to individuating different people, like I'm different than you, but we're all made of mind, and it's probably the same mind. It's probably God's mind. Um, yeah, how do we like? How is it that I have a different conscious experience than you? Is it, I mean, I guess you could just go with the dream characters again and being like, in my dream, this character is different than that dream, but well, yeah, what do you make of that? It seems like we're made out of all the same stuff, but yet we have
Mhm.
different experiences.
Well, I mean, we all come from different points of reference. I mean, you would
Yeah,
come from your parents, and they're going to give you the genetic information you need to begin your life, and so
yeah,
that's going to create a different point of reference, different information to sort of view the world through.
yeah,
Same with any other person. We all come from different perspectives, different information, starting points to view and study the world.
yeah. So, okay, let me try and motivate why this freaks me out. So I think of like this, and like this is like mind, but then like there's Michael, and then there's Parker. Just can you? Dang it! Can you see the two? Like
Hmm.
they're still made of. Oh, I guess. Okay, so these are still occupying different points on the mind, like spectrum or field. So they would still have different perspectives. Okay, that's helpful.
Yeah, but you could also say take those two blips, and if you
Yeah,
paint, let's say there was an eyeball on each one, and you
yeah,
paint one red and one blue. Well, one's gonna have red tinted, one's gonna have blue tinted. They're gonna have different perspectives,
yeah,
and so they have different. And that's sort of like the soul building on top of each individual mind. There's
yeah.
different information building up, which is going to create different perspectives.
Okay. All right. This is good. This is helpful. And so I had Philip Goff on, and we talked a little bit. I really like him, but he's a panpsychist, and there's a couple different ways that panpsychism can go. There's like I might be getting it wrong, but there's like micro priority microphysicalist views where like all the fundamental BBs or particles, whatever they end up being, waves or superstrings, they're all conscious. But then you run into this problem of the combination problem of like, well, I have a singular unified phenomenal consciousness. So how is it that I have that when I'm made up of all these trillions of conscious little things? But then there's the priority monist view, which just says like the universe is conscious, and we are different like pieces of the universe but with different properties, and so we have different like perspectives, but ultimately we are all participating in the same like consciousness. um mm, Insofar as I've represented it well, like what do you make of that? Is that similar to the idealism that you put forward?
I think so.
Okay.
I need to study a little bit more to be to
Yeah,
know for sure, though.
yeah. Yeah, I will. I'm gonna send you that paper just because I need to. I don't think I can like repristinate it well enough, but um, yeah, it's like this weird. He calls it universal consciousness, and I guess it's actually not his cosmopsychism, but um, it's like Aldous Huxley has this book, The Perennial Philosophy, and it's like a monist view, and he says it's perennial because it comes back every so often, and he says that's like the most fundamental view, that like we all participate in the same consciousness, and like our individuation is kind of an illusion. But yeah,
Yeah, that's similar to Bernardo Kastrup's view. He
sure. Yeah.
uses the analogy of dissociative identity disorder. So that we are all this one consciousness, and we are all just having a dissociative identity when we are living out our lives.
Yeah. Um, yeah. So, can you interact with that? I guess you might be able to interpret our dream characters in that way. Like they are really us, but we're disassociated from them in that moment. And then when we stop dreaming, they just are like they either vanish or they're like reabsorbed, or probably not reabsorbed, but I guess you could make sense of that of our
Could
dreaming.
be.
Yeah. Right. What do you think about
Yeah, I mean,
like us and God's consciousness? Like it seems like we're Christians, so we want to say that your soul continues on existing. And it's not like we're gonna get reabsorbed when God stops dreaming or something.
yeah, I mean, well, God is infinite. I don't think he's going to just stop dreaming.
Right.
I mean, so there's that perspective. We're not talking about a human who's just taking a nap. We're talking about an infinite God who doesn't rest and just is beyond time itself.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think if God stopped dreaming, I think all of time would go away, and so we wouldn't even this conversation would never even have happened,
Right.
or we wouldn't even go out of existence. Just all this experience just wouldn't even be there.
Yeah.
So, you have that kind of thing that maybe that's what goes on after life. It's just a continual disassociation, constantly going on and on and on,
Yeah.
and exploring the rest of the mind that is infinite and can never fully be grasped or totally understood. So it's just continually going on and on and on.
Yeah.
That's eternity. So you can have that in there as well. There's just no ever in a reabsorption case, perhaps.
Dude, that's kind of cool. That's kind of cool of thinking of like even fleshing out the Imago Dei. Like, yeah, we're
Well,
divine
also
thoughts.
C.S. Lewis talked about this. He's talked about how, like, he was talking about the Eastern religions. I can't remember where he said this, but he's like, they have this idea that, we're all one and we're just going to be reabsorbed. And then you have the naturalist view that we're all these separate beings. And, once we die, we just go out of existence and that's all we are. And only Christianity is this combination idea that we are all connected in some way, but also still individuals in some
Yeah.
way as well.
Yeah. Yeah, it's always kind of nice to be able to find like the middle case where you're like, "Hey, kind of, you guys are kind of right, you guys are kind of right, but you're both wrong. Here's the middle way, and it's better." Um,
Hmm.
I'm wondering if, and I don't know if I've heard you say this or not, but I'm wondering if you think that idealism can help us understand divine intervention a little bit more, because maybe on like a I don't even know, maybe on like a realist account or on a view where God and the world are completely separate. On a non-idealistic view, you have like God interjecting or intervening into what seems like a closed system, and you have to make arguments about causal closure and stuff. Is it any easier on idealism, or do we inherit the same kind of problem, or does that view inherit the same kind of problems?
I don't think it does, because everything is mind, and God can just sort of like, if He wants, add a cheat code into the
Yeah.
mental simulation and change something easily.
Yeah. No, that's good. Does okay, so everything is like okay, the fundamental things are mind, but the physical things, they're you talk a lot about like emergence, like they've emerged out. Are physical things are they just because they're made of mind doesn't mean they're mind, I guess necessarily. Do you make a distinction like are physical things built on mind or are they fundamentally, mind themselves? What do you make of that?
Hmm. Well, I mean, I say physical things are information that is
Yeah.
contingent upon mind. So, mind can imagine something,
Yeah.
and I could, close my eyes and imagine a whole world right now. And that information, of course, is contingent upon mind in a sense, but it is still these information constructs that we sort of build or put together. And so I would just say matter is just information constructs built upon mind. I mean, in a sense, it reduces to the substance of mind, but
Yeah.
it's still more than that.
Okay, yeah, that's helpful. That's really helpful. Information constructs built on mind. Okay. Do you think so I think your arguments usually start with like here's what we have in front of us. Here's physics and here's some good data to, work with and make arguments with. And so it looks like we are living God's mind. But I don't think that you make arguments that say like God couldn't create an external world. Um, uh, do you think that God could make a external world?
Yeah, I mean, I think he could. I just don't think that he needs to, and so he doesn't. I mean, what
Yeah.
would be the point of that? Creating a world that's not contingent on him.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fascinating. Yeah, Sam Liebens, who I mentioned earlier, and Tyron Goldschmidt, they have this argument that like God's perfect, and so he couldn't create anything that's less than perfect, but the idea of a perfect world is incoherent. So God can't create outside of himself. So he can only create inside his mind. And
Mhm.
it's fascinating. It's fascinating to think about, but there's they're not trying to limit God's omnipotence. They're saying like because he's so omnipotent and perfect, he's not able to do this. But it's actually a limitation of he's limited to being omnipotent. I wonder what. Just I'm just tossing that out at you right now. What do you make of that?
No, I think I do agree with that line of
Yeah,
reasoning. I don't see why God has to create a perfect world,
yeah,
as some skeptics have argued.
yeah, yeah. I'm with you on that. Um, how about maybe I just kind of broached it a little bit, but how about the problem of like reconciling free choices if we're in like a dream world? It seems like your focus is not necessarily on the story as it plays out, but more about like the furniture of the story, like all the stuff on the stage, and then maybe the actors can freely act how they want. Does that sound right, or
Mhm.
what do you make of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's that God creates like actual little characters, like in a story world, and they take on a life of their own. They sort of come into existence, and they're not entirely determined by God's will or His first person perspective, but that you could still say they are emergent from Him, sort of like dream characters, and that we create are emergent from us, but we don't entirely control them when we're in our dreams.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Yeah, I like that. That's fascinating. Um, okay. So going back to this is all over. Going back to like quantum mind type stuff. And I'm not as familiar with like your quantum mind videos, but um, do you do you go in for like Penrose's microtubule type stuff? His view.
So I talk a little bit about the microtubules, and I think there's something there, but I mean, they sort of try to say that consciousness is quantum collapse happening in
Yeah.
these microtubules. So a collapse moment, when something collapses, it creates a moment of consciousness. So our brains are constantly creating moments of consciousness from different quantum collapse experiences happening in our microtubules. I don't think that's what's happening.
Okay.
I agree more with Henry Stapp that consciousness causes collapse, not that consciousness is collapse.
Yeah.
So there's a difference there. I think you still have the measurement problem if you're going to take that view.
Okay.
So I tend to say that it's just sort of like the manifestation of a conscious agent. This is what the brain basically is. And the collapse in the microtubules would be just a manifestation of thoughts or the conscious agent making a choice.
Yeah.
So that's all that it is. And so that's the difference. That's what Penrose and Hameroff try to do is they want to try to go so far to the extreme that they're saying that the brain is creating consciousness by generating these different collapses constantly happening.
And I mean, would you call that a reductionist view? Because it's like making consciousness, yeah, depend on the brain. Yeah. What you've argued is
Yeah,
that's the wrong
it's
way.
physicalism.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's physicalism in some ways, and so I reject that outright.
Yeah. No, that's good. Um, so God has set up like, psychophysical laws that so certain things happen. Like there's still an external world to us, though it is in God's mind. Um, what, and we have souls. Like, man, when sperm meets egg, are there two? Yeah, right. Can you tell us how babies happen? When sperm meets egg, is it like there's soul underneath the physical sperm that and the physical sperm is like an information construct and then the egg is a information construct of soul and they come together like cuz we still have natural processes in science and stuff that we still have.
Mhm.
So how do we think through that on this emergent view?
Well, I mean, I would take the view that what you have is a sperm and an egg is it's the information needed to begin a soul. It sort of creates the beginning aspect of us building our souls. And when life begins at conception, that's the beginning of our soul. And so, it starts to build the information that we keep building over life that's building up our souls. So that's
Okay.
the beginning of it, in my view.
So at least one time, the physical gives rise to the mental in the sperm meeting an egg.
Well, I mean, what do we mean by giving rise to the
Yeah.
mental? I would say that this is just the manifestation
Okay.
of the mental itself. So it's not so much physical, it's giving rise to a mental thing. It's that this is just what it, it's the same with us. We are a manifestation of a conscious agent. This is the physical body. And likewise, that is just the information of two people coming together to begin a new soul. And so it just sort of begins the process again. I don't think
Okay.
the physical really. I mean, you also have to take in mind the fact that I don't deny that there's this total distinction between the physical and the mental. I mean,
Sure.
physical things affect us all the time.
Yeah.
You give me drugs, it's going to affect the way I'm going to act and behave. So there's this constant interaction going on because I don't think there's any sort of distinction there. The
Yeah.
physical is just the manifestation of the mental.
Yeah.
So the same would apply with the beginning of a new soul.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, it makes sense in the case of like a person, but like a pre-person, like a sperm and an egg before they're joined. To me, it would seem like they would have to have like half soul, and then this physical construct that we are able to see, sperm and egg, and then they like are joined, and then you get like a full soul. Do, does that you see what I'm saying?
Well, I mean, what is that? I mean, well, I mean, again, if we mean by soul, I'm not defining soul as a conscious agent. I'm defining soul as the information that a
Yeah.
conscious agent builds.
Yeah.
And so what I'm saying is that like if you have that universal consciousness, it's just sort of opening a new window into a new individual, you could sort of say. So universal consciousness sort of opens a new window to a new individual and starts building a new soul there.
Yeah.
And that's sort of how I take it. It's not so much the consciousness begins and prior, it's like these two different half conscious things, and it just comes together and
Yeah.
makes the conscious thing. So,
Yeah. Okay, so I think the reason I'm getting, like, confused is because we live and move and have our being in mind, and yet, like, I have a mind, right? Or I am a mind also.
I would say you are a mind and you have a soul. So, you are a mind building a soul, and that's what we are.
Okay, is my mind is my mind made of God's mind?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I think God sort of just created another consciousness. When Jesus says in John 17, I pray that they see themselves as one as we are one. I think
Mhm.
that's a pretty powerful statement there. So it's, we are one in some sense. And C.S. Lewis, of course, talked about this as well.
Yeah.
And we just are individual souls that are being built from that.
Dude, that's helpful. That's a really helpful clarification. Okay. How about
Mhm.
when, so we're Christians, how about when, a Christian is indwelt by the Holy Spirit? Um What do you what's happening? Maybe can you give us an idealist gloss on that?
I don't, I don't, I mean, I don't know what I would say beyond like it's just not literally the Holy Spirit moving through space and coming and dwelling in us like physically. It's just we have invited God to be more of a guide in how we build our souls, and so
Mm.
God, who is our ultimate creator, just takes a more active role in our life. I guess you could say.
Is that
I
ex
don't. I mean, it's.
is that
I mean, it's
external
hard to
to
really
us
for me
or
to explain the. I mean, it's hard for me to really explain the physics or the metaphysics of it because I can't I
Right.
can't speak to that because we've not done any, actual. We can't literally do any experiments on that, so it's
Yeah.
hard for me to really say.
Yeah. I was thinking of, like, in a dream, if I'm able to I'm not very good at this, but one of my friends is really good at, like, lucid dreaming, and I was thinking, like, if he, like, came alongside his dream characters or somehow, like, lucidly dreamt into, like, cooperating with them, like, internally, into, cooperating and helping shape them and their actions and stuff. Maybe that would be like an analog. Though again, we're speaking into like crazy mysteries and stuff too.
I mean, yeah, that could be a possibility there.
Yeah. But that's what you do, man. That you're like you go in on this like deep stuff and you make all these mysteries like, "Oh, that seems plausible. This is like a plausible explanation for something that's crazy and mysterious." So, you're the right guy to
Hmm.
ask on this stuff, man. I love it. Um, what else? We got cosmopsychism, that's good. Oh yeah, okay. So we've talked just like, on Facebook Messenger or whatever about like views on the Trinity. Is that still like is that secret? You're working on that in secret, or have you talked about your own views on the Trinity yet?
No, I've talked about it publicly. I think that we need to explain the Trinity, we need to appeal to philosophy of mind.
Yeah, totally. Are you able to kind of just delve into a little bit of that with us?
Yeah, I can do a little bit of that before we wrap up.
Yeah.
So generally, my view is that uh, people will try to argue the logical problem of the Trinity. How can one being be three persons? And the way I sort of take that is through philosophy of mind itself and how we try to define agency. So if we're trying to define what an agent is, it can get kind of difficult because we tend to define it as a conscious self that is able to make free choices. So I can consciously decide to pick up my glass and consciously decide to put it down. But a lot of stuff we do is not through conscious deliberation. It's through what I would call running on autopilot. Like when we drive, we're
Right.
often just turning the wheel or pushing the pedal without thinking about it. We don't have to consciously think to do these things.
Mm.
So Daniel Dennett talks about this, about how, in some sense, we create another version of ourselves that just sort of can do certain things on its own. So we have, in my view, two senses of agency in our minds. We have a broad and a narrow sense. The narrow sense is this little man in the machine, as you would so to say, who
Yeah.
can decide between different desires, different dispositions, different goals, and make a choice. But he's still deciding between things or aspects that are part of his whole mind or his whole soul, so
Mm.
to speak. And then there's that broad sense of agency, which includes all of that stuff. So if you got in a car crash, you couldn't say, officer, it wasn't my fault. I was daydreaming. It was my soul that did it. That wouldn't fly.
Yeah.
You clearly created that soul, that broad sense of agency that got into the car crash. So my view of the Trinity is just take our understanding of agency. We talk about ourselves almost as if we are two aspects of our agency. You will say something like, I'm too hard on myself, or,
Mm.
I'm always putting myself down. Well, wait, what do you mean you're doing that to you? There's only one you, but you
Yeah.
can talk about yourself in two ways, broad and narrow. So then I just say that God is a broad sense of agency with three narrow senses of agency.
Yeah.
And that's how it's one being. We can think of ourselves as one broad sense of agency with a narrow sense of agency. Now picture an agent who is a broad sense of agency and has three narrow senses of agency. Well, that's the Trinity. And we have a really good analogy that came out recently in a show called Moon Knight. Moon
Yeah.
Knight is set up as a person who's got multiple personality disorder, but he really doesn't have that because there's three agents in his mind. There's Mark, Steven, and Jake, and they talk to each other. They coexist with each other, and Mark is the source of the other two. He generates Stephen and Jake from him. He's
Hmm.
the ultimate source. He's the only one that would have uh, a deity, so to speak,
Yeah.
if he was outside of time.
Yeah.
So the same would apply with the Trinity. You take Moon Knight and you put him outside of time. Mark generates Stephen and Jake, but he is the ultimate source of the two. And yet they're all one substance, they're all one mind. He doesn't generate an agent outside of his mind.
Yeah.
He generates agents in his mind that are fully him. They're fully Moon Knight. Have all the powers of Moon Knight. They can do everything he can do. So they don't lack any power, any uh, knowledge that he would have in that world. And so the same thing would apply to the Trinity. So if we take philosophy of mind and we stop comparing the Trinity to physical things like light or water, I think we have a much better way to explain it
Yeah.
because mental things can be explained as being three in one in a much more easier way than a physical thing could be.
Yeah. Okay, this is helpful. Just one follow up before I let you go here. So is does the broad conception of agency, does that correspond to like God, and narrow corresponds to the Father, Son, and Spirit?
Yeah, yeah, that's kind of what I'm getting at. But
Okay.
you also have to think of it in this regard: is that this is an objection Brian Lefto raises. Like, who is God in that sense? Would he be a fourth member of the Trinity?
Sure.
And Christians want to avoid that because we would say, no, there's only three persons. The Trinity itself is not a person of the Trinity. Well, this sense of agency can get over that objection, in my view,
Yeah.
because we would say that of ourselves, we are one agent, even though we can see ourselves in a broad and a narrow sense of
Yeah.
agency. Likewise, the same with God. The Father can see himself as God in the broad sense, as well as the narrow sense as the Father, who is not the Son, whereas the Son can see himself as God in the broad sense
Yeah.
and not the Father. Same with the Holy Spirit.
Yeah.
So you get around that with, I think, this
Yeah.
by just doing philosophy of mind. And
Yeah.
so, what I want to encourage is more Christians do philosophy of mind when they're trying
Amen.
to study the Trinity.
Yeah. All right. Last one. Is there something that it's like to be God that is distinct from what it's like to be the Father or from the Son or from the Holy Spirit?
No,
Okay.
I do not think so. And that
Okay.
that again goes back to the agency. There's not You would not say there's what it's like. There's something distinct about being your broad sense of agency from who you are. That's still you. Likewise, God is still the Father is still God, the Son is still God, the Holy Spirit is still God, and that same
Yeah.
understanding that we have about our own agency.
Yeah. Okay. I think this dovetail or this works nicely with Chad McIntosh's view of the Trinity. Dude, this is good, man. There's so much stuff to connect in, and we're working with different people too. So like, I'm excited to talk more, man. This is really fun. Thanks so much for taking the time. I'm sure everyone already know if they're watching my channel. I'm sure they know about yours, but just in case they don't, it's inspiring philosophy. Michael, anything else to pitch? Man, if I can point anyone in your direction, I'd love to.
I mean, I'll be doing a series on eschatology starting in March. I'll be answering the objection if Jesus was a failed apocalyptic
Oh,
prophet of
nice.
the
That's
first
right.
century.
Yeah, that'd be awesome, man. I'm looking forward to it. Well, dude, thanks so much for the time, and thanks for what you do. You help a lot of people. You've helped me out, so I seriously appreciate your work. Everyone, go support him on Patreon and locals and all that good stuff wherever he's at. That's gonna have to do it for now, folks. This has been Parker's Pensées, and as always, all glory to God.